So hello everyone, this is Christopher Mick at the Hudson Area Public Library. This is a bit of an unusual video today. We've have a series of women in STEM videos that we've been posting since the library kind of went into a COVID-19 situation. So a lot of the programs we were excited about for this summer and fall, we've unfortunately had to postpone indefinitely. Some of those were including the Girls Who Code camp I was going to be running, and we had a Women in STEM camp we were going to be offering that we were excited about. And with those being put on hold, we wanted to find a way to stay engaged with those young women in the community. And we thought these videos would be one way to offer them an opportunity to stay engaged and hear from some people that are actually working in these fields that I talk about in a way kind of mapping out. So this interview will also be part of a newspaper interview for the Hudson Star Observer. So I was lucky enough to interview astronaut Christina Koch the other day about her record-setting mission on the International Space Station. And that interview, along with the one I'll be conducting today with Poppy, will be part of that newspaper article that hopefully classrooms will get to share as well in the Hudson area. So today I'm very honored to have Poppy Northcutt as our guest today. I'm just going to do a brief bio on her and then get into this for those of you that are not familiar with her work. She studied mathematics at the University of Texas, and upon graduating was hired by a company called TRW out of college, and she worked as a computress, which we'll be talking about a little bit later. Some of you that are familiar with my programs on Hidden Figures will know about some of those young women that were hired as computers. That was actually their written on their ID badge. They were human computers for doing a lot of the calculation work. So I'm sure we'll touch on that. She worked through TRW as a contractor at NASA at the Johnson Space Center in Houston, Texas, wound up working in mission control. And this actually leads to one of the first questions I had for you, because in reading some of the history on your backstory there, if I'm in error of any of this, please correct me, but I was reading that you worked there, and then for 6 months in your initial training, you were promoted to the technical department. And actually,
it was a little more than a year.
Okay.
I was at the end of the first 6 months, when I had my review at TRW, the operations manager told me that he expected to promote me at the end of a year.
Okay.
Into what was called a member of the technical staff, which was a considerable promotion at the time.
Well, and that's what I was reading, what I want to talk about, because there was no, from what I was reading, there was no pay mechanism to get you to that huge jump. And so you had to be given these raises all the time to try to get you up to the pay level that the men were at in the same department. Is that correct?
That's correct. Actually, my promotion was delayed a couple of months. I can't remember if it was 2 or 3 months. And when I finally went in and met with the operations manager, what he said was it would have been easier to have fired me and rehired me, because he had been fighting all of that time to try to get me to the level he thought that I should be at. But the corporation structure above him just did not accommodate that large a pay increase. So he compromised, and he said he hated to do that, but he was sort of tired of fighting them. And I was raised to the bottom of the pay scale as a member of the technical staff, which was still a huge increase over what I've been earning. And then he said that, he was still unsatisfied with that. I think it sort of bothered him in terms of he felt he should have the power to do what he wanted to do. So he sort of took it personally, which was great for me, because he said, so I'm going to continue to give you the maximum raise I can give you until I feel like you've reached parity.
Okay. That was very interesting to me. I did not know that in kind of researching for this, that there was that kind of huge gap that they had to try to figure out a way, and there was just no mechanism to do that for your situation. So that really just surprised me that, well, all the other hurdles you went through, but just that one, I'm just trying to get up to the proper pay level that you should have been at the day you started that job. So
Well, and I think that women to a certain extent still experience that. Uh, if you're underpaid when you start, it's very hard to catch up.
No, definitely. And okay, and then keeping on the timeline, because I'm just trying to keep people oriented for where we are in the time here. So this is the mid 1960s, and you're working in, because some of the students I've talked to, when all the 50th anniversary programs were happening for Apollo 11, I was presenting to students, and we talked about TLI maneuvers, translunar injection, going, especially for Apollo 8, the first time leaving the Earth, going to the moon. But you were working on the flip side of that. You were working on the trajectories for bringing them back from lunar orbit to when that burn happened, to precisely come back on a trajectory to safely come back to the Earth.
Yes, and our program was really an abort program. It wasn't necessarily tied to, if you have to abort, you don't know exactly when you're going to have to do that. So you don't know if you are going to be in lunar orbit or not. You hope you will be. But you might still be on your way to the moon doing an abort.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really a return to Earth whenever it is that you need to get back, whether it's in good times or bad.
Right, you needed to work all those variables, if it was an immediate need to leave orbit, or if it was a planned departure leaving orbit, or any of those situations.
Yes, exactly. And that was the big challenge. It's not that big a challenge to do this if you know when you're going to do it, if it's part of a planned maneuver, mm-hmm. because you have you have time. Okay. Mm-hmm. But if you're trying to do this and you're trying to minimize fuel consumption, for example, which could often be a problem, or you're trying to minimize the transit time, which, if you have consumable problems, that might be the reason you're doing that. Then it's the optimization of that maneuver that makes it really difficult.
Mm-hmm. And you were the first woman then working in mission control, and you started in one of the back rooms.
Well, I was always in a back room. Okay, well, I was always in SSR.
Okay. Didn't you get up
staff
to
support?
Right. And then, so we talked about Apollo 8 being kind of that first mission for that. So this was the first time these sequences were really coming to bear, these programs might be called on. And then that kind of continued. In the programming aspect, I was interested, did the number of repeat missions to the moon, did those further missions refine your data? As there was, Apollo 10 and Apollo 11 and Apollo 12, as the program went along, did any of that data they were getting by being in orbit affect any of your computations?
Not directly. Indirectly, it did. But the main thing that was going on for us in the subsequent programs, in the subsequent missions, was that we were looking at doing more advanced missions where they would be going into high inclination orbits. They never actually flew any of those missions. Okay, mm-hmm. That would have been more challenging, because in those high inclination orbits, we would be looking at doing a return to Earth that wasn't just a single burn. It would be a 2-impulse maneuver, or it might even be a 3-impulse maneuver, just to get on the course home. And that meant even more difficult optimization if you're trying to do it very rapidly to do an abort. Mm-hmm. So we didn't fly any of those.
Okay. And then
we were also looking at preliminarily at Mars.
Well, yeah, I had that question later on, but we could talk about that now, because toward the end of your time at NASA, I saw that you worked kind of in the advanced programs area, and you were doing computations for Mars trajectories.
At that point, I wasn't doing so much. I wasn't really doing the Mars work. I was the task manager, which is doing the technical supervision. Okay. And our task was, one of the people that I was on our task was doing primarily the Mars stuff.
Okay. Yeah, because that was very interesting to me. I had Werner von Braun's kind of proposal packet that I have, which kind of laid out all the steps where he was targeting, early 1980s, and using NERVA rockets and kind of assembling things in Earth orbit, and very fascinating. And from a lot of the people I've talked to, all the math kind of works out that they, if it was funded properly, they think that would have been a successful program, that all would have worked as kind of drawn up.
Well, and you want to do your time. Your timing is very important too, because you want to optimize the location of Mars relative to the Earth.
Mhm. And okay, in the timeline then, so we get all the way up to, because your last Apollo mission you worked was at Apollo 13.
That's the last one that I was in the center,
Okay.
in the control center.
And
But our program was there all of the time. The main reason we went over there in the first place, we weren't supposed to go over there. That wasn't really initially planned.
okay.
It was that they accelerated the schedule on Apollo 8. And so the flight controllers had no familiarity at all, really, with what was involved in doing a trans-Earth injection.
Okay. And in the Apollo 13 situations, as I know you've said before a lot, you'd already kind of crunched the numbers on the scenario they wound up being in, which was using the lunar module kind of as the main engine instead of the command and service module engine for doing the burns. So I remember you talked about in other interviews, you'd run those with using the ascent stage or the descent stage.
Or a combination of both.
Right. And so I think I know surprises some of the younger people I talk to, because they think just watching the movie Apollo 13 that this was this crazy curveball that nobody had thought of, and the two vehicles being docked and using the lunar module as an engine. But that had been tried. Even on Apollo 9, they had tried those maneuvers in Earth orbit, just in case a situation like that happened.
Exactly. I mean, a big part of what you want to do is you want to plan, you want to do contingency planning. You want to think ahead for as many possibilities as you can.
Mm-hmm.
Now what we were doing, I mean, it did, in terms of what I was doing, it didn't matter what was firing the engine. Okay. I mean, it's, what engine or wherever. I mean, our computations would basically be the same, whether it's 1, 2, or however many.
Okay. And one thing I wanted to talk to you a little bit about that I don't think gets covered a lot, and it's kind of hard for me to explain to the younger audiences because there's not a lot of footage or stories on it. But can you talk about some of the sim supervisor trainings you did where they would kind of throw, a scenario at you, those failure modes, and I try to explain that to the kids, just what you're touching on about how there's so much practice, there's so many, every possible permutation situation to kind of work out all the kinks, to make sure the code is right, there's no bugginess going on. But can you talk about maybe citing one that was very challenging or stressful for you, or just what that was like when you ran through a sim sup?
Well, I can't point to a simulation that was particularly difficult for us in terms of return to Earth. Our program was very well behaved by that point. I mean, the really difficult thing for us going in was to get it flight ready in the first place, because they accelerated the schedule. So just getting the testing done, we were still fixing bugs almost up to launch, which was really not supposed to be happening.
Okay.
It was supposed to be frozen that late. But in terms of the simulations, I mean, it was just an exhausting kind of thing to a large extent, because you would go over and you don't know what's going to happen. Okay. It's a surprise. And you only know where you are in the mission. Okay. You're at, 98 hours into the mission. I mean, so you just that's just where you start. You know
Mm-hmm.
where you're going to be at the time. And then you don't know what's going to happen after that. What's going to go wrong.
Right.
All you know is that there will probably be something that goes wrong.
Yeah.
So you have to be on your toes the whole time. And one of the odd things about it is that when you actually fly the missions, the missions themselves compared to the simulations are usually pretty boring because
Sure.
most things go right.
Yeah.
So, people always said, oh, well, yeah, things, it's pretty easy. Okay. Things are going along. They're going along correctly.
Yeah.
Of course, when they go wrong, like on Apollo 13, they go wrong big time.
Oh, sure. And in your timeline, were there any women in your time at NASA coming in behind you, or anything else, or was it kind of you just all on your own there at the time you were there?
I was pretty much on my own. There was another young woman that started working at TRW, that she primarily did a lot of work in heat shield stuff, heat transfer. But I mean, we were the only two members of the technical staff at TRW. Now, what the state, what exactly was going on at NASA, I don't know, except I will tell you this. I work for a very progressive company as compared to the overall aerospace industry and NASA.
Okay.
So there weren't very many women at NASA, I can tell you that. I mean, it was basically white men.
Did you ever happen to have any interaction with Margaret Hamilton over at MIT for the?
I did not. First of all,
Okay.
she was halfway across the country.
I just didn't know with you coding and her working the display keyboard if there was ever any communication between the two of you. Okay.
I didn't even know she existed. And I'm
Oh.
sure she didn't know I existed.
Okay. And then kind of jumping to another career here, because this is not the end of your kind of story for that, because in the 80s, you go back to law school to get a law degree. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, I had become active in the women's rights movement to a large extent. I mean, my experience as being the first woman and being in a very heavily male dominated field was a motivator to become involved in the women's rights movement. And in the course of that, I became more and more interested in the law and how the law could help women, more aware of it and so forth. And so I decided to go to law school.
Well, and I read some other things that you're involved in with the mayor's office, and you were kind of pushing for programs to allow women to be able to apply for the fire department and the police department, which they had not been available to work at before.
Yeah, while I was there, I was the women's advocate. And this is actually before I went to law school. I was the women's advocate for the city of Houston under Mayor Fred Hallfines. And we got the first women firefighters in, and we got the first women on patrol into the police department. And we improved the handling of rape victims, rape kits by the city of Houston, as well as a bunch of other things. Did the first equal pay study for the city of Houston, things like that, and increased dramatically the number of women that were on boards and commissions.
Well, that's excellent. Well, I know from looking at some of your public testimony, you've also been an advocate for like LGBTQ individuals and that. So it's kind of amazing just to look at the arc of your life from how things were kind of looked at when you first started to the way. And again, if you heard me say at the beginning, I got to interview Christina Koch by telephone the other day, and just the things she's been able to accomplish in her time at NASA. Now, and the number of female astronauts and the number of people working in different departments, it's pretty amazing to see just in kind of a lifetime, the amount of progress that's been made.
Yeah, it is very impressive. I mean, whenever I talk sometimes, because I've made presentations at the Girls in Tech conference a couple of times, I like to show a picture of the difference at Mission Control between when I was there and what it is now.
Oh, sure.
Although, I was looking very carefully at some of the SpaceX launches and going, wait a minute, I'm not seeing enough women.
Right. Well, and that gets to one of my kind of pet causes, because I mentioned earlier, I was very excited about having a Girls Who Code chapter here. And that's kind of 3rd through 5th grade range, kind of getting them into learning about coding and some basic things and that. And I know, and just going through the data when I'm doing STEM programming and kind of researching trends and what's happening, and I know you've talked about, there really is a lack of women in computer sciences, computer programming and coding, not at all representative of the people that are taking those programs or smart enough to be in those fields and whatnot.
The numbers have gone down. That's what's really disappointing to me, is that back at my time, there were more than 30% of the programmers were women. Okay. And it's now more like 18% these days. So, it's like as the money went up, the representation of women went down.
Yeah, and that really is why I try to consciously be in all my programs addressing that situation in mixed groups, because I'll be talking to combined classrooms, you know, third, fourth graders, and I've got 3 or 4 classrooms there. And I'll say that with the boys in the room, you know, that we've got to get these numbers up, and you've got to, you know, be supportive and encouraging of girls doing this. And is there anything you see that for a program or a way to implement things that would address those numbers?
I don't, and, you know, it's a societal thing too. I mean, I think that it goes all the way back to the treatment of women in the cradle, actually, is that there's a tendency to always talk about what women's appearance is the first thing that is commented on. I mean, even in the cradle, they'll talk about how cute the girl is, okay, or what the girl is wearing. Appearance is always the thing. And I always tell people, I mean, why don't you talk about how smart the little girl is? How clever, how creative, instead of the first remark being of what they look like.
Yeah. Well, in some of my education, I remember seeing a video, sociological video, of where they would have an adult that was not related to the child come in and kind of babysit for a second, and there'd be a scattering, and you might know what I'm talking about here, but a scattering of toys and things around. And almost every single one, man or woman, they would be giving dolls and whatnot to the female baby, and the more mechanical toys and airplanes and puzzles and erector set things to the boys.
Exactly.
That almost to a T. And the women were doing it just as much as the men that were coming into the room. And to your point, I think it starts almost at day one, that there's just that tendency to be like, oh, they're going to want these things. The boys are going to want these things, and that just reinforced.
And see, when I was a little girl, I mean, the toys that I most liked to play with were actually the Lego things, the building block things, and so forth. But I was never given those.
Well, and that's my last. That was my last question. Doing so well in mathematics in your college career, did you have any mentors or encouragement or peers that helped you through, you know, encouraged your studies and love of that? Or was that just all kind of self-driven from you? You know, I'm good at this, I want to do this, I'm going to do it.
It was mainly self-driven. I mean, I tested really well on that. Now I have an older brother that also, you know, is in mathematics. So, I mean, it's sort of a family thing. But it really had to do with just aptitude, and I was good at it more than anything else. At the time, women were basically encouraged, if they went to college, they were expected to be school teachers or nurses or executive secretaries. And, you know, that was the vision that I had, was that I would probably end up as a mathematics school teacher.
Okay. Well, you've done a lot more than that, Poppy.
I have.
You have.
And I had a good time doing it.
Well, and if I can find here, I had, where did I put it? I'm going to paraphrase it because I'm not going to find my note now that I want it, but a quote I think you did for the LA Times, because I want to credit the right interview, but you said, I think you were a one-time rocket scientist, a part-time lawyer, and a full-time women's advocate, something like that. I don't.
Yeah, I think it's a one-time rocket scientist, a sometime lawyer, and a full-time women's rights advocate.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I thought that's a beautiful statement, kind of encompassing, you know, your career, what you're passionate about.
That's sort of how my Twitter bill is.
Yes. Well, Pop, was there anything else you want to talk about? Those were my questions. And I know your time is you were very kind to give me a half hour today. I don't want to keep you, but is there anything else you wanted to talk about?
You Stews can follow me on Twitter. That's where I'm mainly active these days. Okay. And I hope that people will become socially involved too, in terms of being civically engaged, because we need people that understand science and technology to be civically engaged, not just holed up in their own little pastime, but be part of the community at large and be active in the community at large.
Completely agree. That's my marching orders every day, is just to the community and the boys clubs and the Girl Scouts and all the groups I work with, just kind of that science literacy and that kind of way of thinking. So, well, I can't thank you enough for your time. I will share your Twitter information and some of the links for the other interviews that you've done, so people can find out more about you. And I really appreciate you making the time to speak with us today.
Well, it was great to talk to you. I'm sorry I stood you up the other day.
No, I'm actually at the library today. I had a construction worker in the house, and I had the dogs with me downstairs, and they weren't liking the noises. And I know you got delayed, so it all worked out better for today. So I'm glad it worked out.
So send me a picture. I don't know how to take a picture off this screen.
Oh, sure. I will do that. Actually,
And
I'll
I'll
take.
post that on my Twitter, and especially if you tell me whenever you're going to post whatever you're going to post.
Okay, I will do that. Thank you so much, Poppy.
Bye-bye.
Take care.